Hey, I'm Samantha, certified integrative nutrition coach and brain health licensed trainer, and I am coming at you today because I have promoted Moringa as a great tool for lots of things, for eye health, nutritional deficiencies, because it has so many nutrients. I wrote a whole blog about it, which you can read in the description to this video. So I was shocked when I saw an email from Dr. Greger talking about why he doesn't recommend Moringa. So of course, out of curiosity, I had to read it because I am someone who is a huge supporter of Dr. Greger's work. His work has been so important because we have a lot that's being done in nutritional research. And we've even learned through his work that doctors in the doctor's offices, it takes about 17 years for something to be learned in research before doctors are implementing it with their patients, right? So there's a huge delay, a huge gap in terms of access to helpful information, because even though we have research happening that shows efficacy for reversing symptomology of chronic disease and metabolic dysfunction that is really pulling health away from American people, people aren't able to access this information for a couple reasons. It's behind a paywall, right? And for those who can afford to get behind that paywall, which most can't, out of all those people that can afford it, very few people can even understand it, right? The studies aren't really written for any layperson to understand. Plus, there are nuances. Even if you get past all the wording and all the mess, there are nuances to really decipher if the research study was done in a way that is valid and reliable and generalizable to the general population, right? So there are all these nuances to it that most people in the general public aren't aware of how to do or what to look for and things like that. So I really appreciate Dr. Greger's work. And so I really had to dive in. What is he seeing that I haven't seen? And I was just really disappointed with his arguments against Moringa. First, let's start with something that was an easy layup, in my opinion. He starts talking about some of these claims around Moringa, using Moringa for diabetes. I have done lots of education around diabetes. You can even look on this channel where I did a whole series recently in 2025 talking about even all the different types of diabetes, type 2 specifically, how we can reverse it with nutrition, lifestyle things that we need to be taken into consideration. What you didn't hear come up is Moringa, right? So we do have an issue where some of these companies who are selling Moringa are probably making claims out there, because I have seen people talk about, oh, Moringa for diabetes, and this is not sufficient. If you have type 2 diabetes and you're just doing Moringa and you're eating all the trash, you're not gonna see any changes in your blood sugar. You're just not. But as opposed to, there's one study that Greger points to with a study on cookies where they used Moringa powder to make the cookie. And yes, they had a not as sharp as a glycemic response to the cookie made using the Moringa powder. That makes sense to me because you're taking a plant, a fiber-rich plant, to make something that's cutting down too on the sugar load on this cookie. But you're not going to reverse type 2 diabetes doing these little things like this if you're still eating cookies and you're still eating lots of saturated fat, right? And not giving the body a chance to clear out all that fat so that you can have insulin sensitivity, right? If you understand the mechanism for type 2 diabetes, people are really always looking for a quick fix. And that makes them more vulnerable to some of these messages that come out from these companies, which quite frankly is disinformation, right? You're deceiving the public by omitting lots of really necessary information that could be helpful to them just so you could sell your product. Like, you're not going to take Moringa and reverse diabetes, right? It's not going to happen. So that's an easy layup, right? But then he goes into a couple interesting things. He brings in a study that was done on rats, and basically says that the Moringa induced abortion in these rats, and that there have been cultures where they have used Moringa to induce abortion. And so pregnant people for sure shouldn't take it. Now, I know that we have talked about how Moringa is great for producing breast milk, right? And how, all the nutrients in it. That's why it helps to produce the breast milk, because of all these nutrients in the Moringa. So this is a really shocking piece of information for me to receive. But when I look into the study and we dive into the study, and I highly recommend you look into it for yourself, because I'll actually post the link to the full study. I don't know that he does. I had to do some Google searching for some of the stuff to actually pull down the study to see what he's looking at, why he came to these conclusions. But when you look at this study, you'll notice a few things. First of all, it's rats. Let's start there. It's rats. And rat studies, although they can point to clues of what an impact can be to humans, they're not 100% always related, right? So for example, I'll show you a really great example that came up recently, because I was listening to, or reading actually, a presentation from a professor who was sharing information that melatonin improves cognitive function. And we've heard this before. But when I dive into the studies that are available to really investigate if that is true, right? Just to be on the safe side, is it true that we should be taking a melatonin supplement if we have Alzheimer's, and that can improve cognitive function? What we saw in the studies is that they did research on these rats. They did a rat study. In the rat study, melatonin did improve cognitive function. So then they went ahead and tested it on humans with Alzheimer's disease. Everyone had Alzheimer's. And they found that the melatonin supplement did not improve their cognitive function, but it did improve their sleep. So there is a benefit for the Alzheimer's population in taking melatonin, but it does not, at least according to that study, directly improve cognitive function. These people with Alzheimer's, they had improved sleep, and that would tell me that if you're having improved sleep, why wouldn't they also have improved cognitive function? But they did not show improved cognitive function with melatonin. So what can we deduce from this is that when a rat study says one thing, that creates now a hypothesis to test, a theory that we can test in humans that may or may not come to the conclusion that we expect. That's why we test it, right? So with this thing around the Moringa, there's great reason to question, especially since I've taken Moringa for years, right? Not every day, not every week, and not every month, right? It's on and off when I need to, when I feel like it. I'm not living off of supplements, and I think if you have a healthy diet and lifestyle, you really don't need to. So I agree with, I think his ultimate premise is that if this thing is really unaffordable, like you really don't need to have this. You should be able to have a healthy diet and lifestyle just from what's available in the grocery store. And I agree with this. At the same time, to say that it's causing abortion, this is just outlandish, right? I've never tried to have a child, so I'm not a great example of this. But what I can tell you is that from all the people that I've talked to, that we've even sold Moringa smoothies to, no one has come back that they weren't able to have kids or breastfeed or whatever. It's quite the opposite, right? You have all these people taking Moringa and nobody is having babies, like their babies aren't being aborted. Like we would see with the demand of Moringa having gone up and in this health conscious community, all of it, they're having children. They're having children. And we haven't seen this come up. So this doesn't make sense. It's worth testing actually on humans. Now, I want to go back to the study because first of all, my first point with this is the fact that they used rats, and that doesn't necessarily mean it will have the same effect on humans. That's number one. Number two is that not only was it rats, but they used the Moringa extract, okay, which nobody uses. Like most people, what I have promoted and what most people are using in the market is Moringa leaf powder. And I've talked about this before. The Moringa tree has different parts of it, right? The leaf, the root, the seeds, they have different use cases, right? So we've talked about how the Moringa seeds can clean water. You would not eat the Moringa seeds, right? The Moringa seeds, they can clean water. The leaves are what you eat for all that nutritional density. It's rich in vitamin A, C, E, K, iron, protein, all this stuff, but you can find that information in the blog, right? So it's the leaves that we want to be consuming, that most people on the market, at least reputable companies, right? So if you go to Whole Foods, for example, and this is not an endorsement of any singular company, but one of the more prominent ones that we've seen around in a lot of different places is Kuli Kuli, for example, right? It's the leaf they're using in powdering, right? And that's what people are eating. They're not using a Moringa extract. I literally have never seen a Moringa extract. Now, when you talk about herbal extracts, how are they made? Usually the extracts have alcohol. You can get alcohol free, but they're basically tinctures. And if you know anything about herbs, these things are highly potent, way more potent than a powdered herb, a leaf, a root, a bark that you powder. Is completely different than the extract. In this study in particular, they made the Moringa extract using a solution of 90% ethanol, alcohol, and 10% water. So this is an alcohol-based extract. Is it safe for pregnant women to be consuming alcohol? No, it's not. So that's number one. They gave these rats alcohol and they were pregnant. They gave them an extract, which no human uses, right? Not only that, so it was an extract, it had alcohol. Also, they overdosed these poor rats, right? They overdosed them. Not only are extracts more potent, but the amount that they gave them, they basically gave them what would be equivalent to humans. If you were giving it to humans, it would be 12 grams of extract to a human, right? Which is, if you use Kuli Kuli Moringa powder, for example, they say 2 rounded tablespoons is 6 grams of their powder. So that's 4 grams of their powder. 4 tablespoons of their powder would be 12 grams. But now we're comparing powder, which most people use, to an alcohol-based extract, which no one uses. Completely different. And so they overdose. And that's what I'm saying, that even with the powder, I personally have never had 4 tablespoons of Moringa powder in a day. And I guess somebody who just lives off of smoothies, they might have maybe 4 smoothies a day, or maybe you might have a bodybuilder who's doing a lot and they're probably using this as their protein source. Okay, so they're doing 2 tablespoons in the morning and then 2 tablespoons in the evening. Maybe they're doing that. And are they at risk now of having an aborted fetus? And it's because of this? We would need to do a study, right? If we're really concerned, to compare the impact, right? So you overdosed these rats, first of all. But okay, you gave them this much, they were pregnant, they lost their babies. Does the same thing happen to a human with powder? Because no human is doing an alcohol-based extract, number one. And number two, definitely not when pregnant, because we don't do alcohol when we know we're pregnant. The last thing I want to talk about regarding this study is the funding, which I think is interesting, because Gregor in particular, right? He put us on game when it comes to looking at studies and being really discerning with who benefits from the conclusions drawn from this study, right? Because most people are going to run with the conclusion. They're not going to really investigate how the study was done. Is it statistically significant? Is it reliable? Is it valid? All of these things. What are some of the threats to validity within the study, which we're looking at right now as we're digging into it? So I looked at the funding. This study in particular was funded by the Indian government because they were searching for a cheap local birth control options. They were having a population issue that they wanted to use something that the people were used to using already, and trying to figure out basically at what level could possibly potentially induce abortions for population control. That's what they were trying to get to. And what we understand from statistics and research is that when you're looking for an answer, you will find the answer you're looking for. They weren't trying to find a use case for Moringa for the nourishment of people's cells and bodies, which we know it can do. They were trying to see, okay, at what dose of the herb can we induce abortion? And if you talk to any herbalist who is worth their salt, right? They know what they're talking about. They will tell you any herb at a certain level, you can have adverse effects to the body, which is why when you're working with this stuff, you want to work with somebody who is well versed on it. For example, and it's not to say that, oh, this is more dangerous than stuff in the grocery store, because even Dr. Greger himself talked about a situation where this woman, it was an Asian woman, and I think this story comes up in the book somewhere, where it was talking about why there's a certain group of people saying this compound, I think it had to do with goitrogens or crucifers or something like that. I think it was around goiters, like why you shouldn't have cruciferous vegetables, because then you're going to get goiters and that, or a goiter, and it's going to cause all these problems for your thyroid and stuff like that. And he was saying, this is not true. And he pointed to a case study of a woman who was following online trends or whatever, and heard that if she drank bok choy, that would help with her blood sugar issues, right? So she had type 2 diabetes, and she was trying to get help with her blood sugar issues, and she latched onto this thing with bok choy, and she was having about 5 pounds of bok choy a day that she was juicing. And she ended up in the hospital. I don't know if she died or something, but she got really sick, at least. She probably even died, but I can't remember exactly that part of the story. But the whole point, what I got out of that is like, who the hell is having so much bok choy? Like, you're not going to juice that much bok choy unless you get caught up on this stuff that is running around the internet and you're not fully understanding the mechanisms of action, how the body actually works, disease processes, right? And so here's a actual, like, what we would consider to be a benign food in the grocery store that someone then uses at such a level that most people would never do. Most people would never do that. And they're not. That's why it was such a rare case study. And that's why it's sold in the grocery store without any black box label or whatever. Yet it killed this woman. Okay. I think that we need to be a little bit more discerning. Any kind of herb, right, taken at too much of a level, a crazy amount, any kind of food taken at too much of a, you know what I'm saying? You talk about toxicity that we could have, right? You can have too much iron, for example. You could have too much potassium or something, right? But if you're getting it from a whole food, the amount of food you would have to consume is like ridiculous that most stomachs cannot handle, right? So it's very rare that could happen from a whole food source, but it's still a glimmer of a possibility if somebody was trying to do it, right? Like these researchers, they were trying to find, how do we use this thing for population control? And they figured out how to do it, right? If we go high enough, right, we can do that without killing the person, possibly, potentially. They didn't actually do a study on humans. They did it on rats. So this study basically creates more questions than it does answers. And from this, we will never deduce that actually people are losing their babies from it, because we see out in the public that is not happening. Okay. And then the last thing I want to touch on in his article on this that really just has me perplexed, why he even, like, why he would even go there, is when he starts talking about Stevens-Johnson syndrome. And he doesn't even link to the study, like you have to Google it. But he basically talks about this one case study where this guy had moringa leaf and ended up with some fatal like skin issue. So he had lesions with blister formation over his face, mouth, chest, abdomen, and genitalia 14 hours after consuming Moringa. And they were able to deduce that it was the Moringa that caused this reaction because it had happened to him before 3 months prior when he had Moringa at that time. And then Dr. Greger goes into HIV could also cause this. So then I'm like, how do we know it was the Moringa that caused this for him? Did the guy have HIV? Number one. There could be other reasons why he had this adverse effect, because I've had Moringa leaf. That's never happened to me. But that's number one. But number two, we know food allergies is a thing, right? Having a juice bar, I even learned there were people who were allergic to apples. I didn't even know that could be a thing. But now we're in a situation now where people's gut microbiomes are under attack from a variety of different toxic chemicals that never existed 100 years ago. And so people are having food intolerances to things that our ancestors have been eating for millennia. Things as simple as an apple, right? People are having issues. People are having nut allergies, seed allergies, histamine intolerance, mast cell activation from all sorts of things, right? I'm not going to say this guy, obviously they have him documented. There's the study. He did go through this. But to say that we're all going to have an immune response, which this is potentially an immune response, right? A flare-up from Moringa? But we're not. And it's possible for some people they will have Moringa. Like I even had clients who I recommended ashwagandha to, which is in the neuroscience community is a best practice for clients that you have who are under immense stress, right? Ashwagandha is a really great herb to calm the nervous system down, right? Yet my client did not experience any benefit from ashwagandha. Should I come out with a blanket statement that says now everybody who's saying that ashwagandha has merits is lying and they're doing false studies? No, but it didn't work for my client. There could be other reasons why that would have a more outsized effect. She's not feeling this. Maybe she is having an impact, but she can't feel it because there are other things that are having a more outsized impact on her stress levels, or maybe the ashwagandha is just not vibing with her system. And this can happen, right? Even when we talk about pharmaceutical drugs, not all pharmaceuticals work for everybody. And there are reasons why. When we look at mental health in particular, you can have 2 or 3 depressed people taking the same drug. One is doing great, the other one is doing horrible, and the other one is not feeling any kind of change from not taking the drug. There are reasons for this, and that's why at Amen clinics, for example, they do scans and they look in, because there's different types of depression depending on the blood flow to the brain. And so depending on your type of depression, you're going to do better on certain drugs versus other drugs, right? So there's nuance to all of it. My assessment of what Dr. Greger has brought forth with Moringa just speaks to actually his bias. And this is where I'm coming from. I love and respect Dr. Greger and his work, okay? And this doesn't make me stop loving and respecting all of what he's brought to the table, but it does make me question now more of what he's bringing out. It just needs to go. I need to go over it with a fine tooth comb, because if I'm going to say something, I do want it to be evidence-based and supported. I think he wants that too. That's why he created nutritionfacts.org, right? He wants us to be evidence-based and to be armed with the right information. But everybody, every single body, including myself, we all have implicit bias. And because we have implicit bias, we're always going to approach something with a certain perspective and viewpoint that will lead us to what we expected in the beginning. And so I think it's very effective to have these types of dialogues and critiques with one another. It's not a fight. It's not a war. It's more of we're all building health literacy together. Right? We're all building health literacy together. It's okay to question things. It's okay to ask for the citations, for the research, so you can do your own research, right? Beyond just a Google study, but actually diving into what exactly did they do in the study? How did they come to the conclusion that they reached? Why did they come to that conclusion? And is this even a reliable lesson or conclusion that can be generalized to the mass public, which I think I've already explained to you. Most of what he brought forth is not valid or reliable for human population. So anyway, I would love to hear your comments on this, like anything that came up for you, because I was really surprised to read this and to see what he's doing. And there are people who are not in the plant-based world who apparently are using science research studies to wield their own opinions in the same fashion that he is. Because I know Gregor knows better, which is why I'm saying this just speaks to his bias, right? His perspective, which he made clear, he put out in the article, that you shouldn't have to spend this money, right? Just buy fruits and vegetables from the grocery store. And so if somebody was coming attacking something in the grocery store, like the bok choy, like crucifers, he would be doing what I'm doing right now and saying, nope, that's not right. He would be doing that critique. He wouldn't even give it a second guess. But this, he said he's not recommending, right? So he's able to now use the research to just wield his own bias. And so you just need to be cautious of that, okay? Anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing your commentary.